And I would like to welcome all of you here this evening and thank you all for coming. Without any further ado, I think we'll get started. I'd like to introduce Mike Corby with Integrated Architecture, who is going to present the conceptual plan this evening for the Hamlet project. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I will, if it's okay, I'll keep my mask off just so you can hear me a little better. But I want to thank all of you who participated in the planning of what I'm going to go through today, because we've been at this it's been almost a year, I think, since we had our first community meeting. And I've actually been in conversations with the township for, seems like 2 or 3 years. So it's nice to finally kind of see a vision. What I'm going to show you tonight, I'm going to kind of conclude tonight's presentation with a timeline to let you guys know what the next steps are. But what you're going to see here today, and what the township's charge was to create a vision for the property that the township owns, basically by the Kmart, just off 31. And ultimately get to a development scenario with a development partner or development partners. So there were a few questions that came up before tonight's presentation from some of you about specific things on the plan. The plan is an idea. It's a concept that is based on a lot of input and a lot of dialogue and a lot of decisions made by the township with your input, obviously. And it's kind of a roadmap for developers to know what the township would like to see there. It doesn't mean that what actually will happen is going to be exactly like this, but the hope is that the partner that the township teams up with aligns closely to what the direction is that I'm going to show you tonight. So I don't mind answering specific questions about the plan, but I just want to kind of qualify it with that. So Harlan, wants to already move into one of the units, and I just said it's a little bit too early. So as I said, we've been at this for a while now. So sometimes things take time, right? And I'm just going to kind of spend a little time, not a lot, just retracing some of the dialogue and some of the activity that we've had over the last year. It's been fun. We've had very lively discussions. The sessions have been pretty well attended. I see a number of familiar faces. But the first meeting that we had, we really tried to get an objective, kind of a what are we trying to do with the property, just in general, as a vision. So really, some of the highlights were an inviting mixed-use town center. So you're going to see in the plan it resembles a little bit of a kind of a central business surrounded by some other uses and some outdoor spaces. And we really wanted to kind of reflect traditional downtown characters. So it's got retail buildings with housing above it. Not a lot, but enough to kind of give it a sense of place and give it the ability to kind of work together as a kind of mix of uses. So, but one of the main goals, obviously, is to get housing, affordable housing, and I don't mean to suggest that it's going to be any type of housing, but I think housing that's accessible, predominantly housing that is different than what's available right now in the county, especially in the township. And this is all based on the data that's been produced over the last few years, identifying the needs in the community. So I spent a lot of time going into that data and calling some of the information in that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that today, but the bottom line is the township, the county, the area is desperate for housing. The township itself is nearly 90% single-family detached housing. There's very little opportunity for those that want to rent a nicer place that doesn't have all the kind of things that you have to get when you rent a house. And so the kinds of housing that we're looking at are for those that are looking for short-term housing or rental housing, or even those that are maybe wanting to get out of a single-family house and get into kind of a little bit more carefree living in a rental situation. So. We also wanted to make sure that we, as we kind of, again, go into conversations with developers, we want to make sure the qualitative aspect is very important. So walkability is very important. You'll see it there, sidewalks, pathways, things that really promote walkability, things that are going to kind of contribute to the quality of life for those that both live within the development, but also those that are planning to visit the development. So I think that was very important. Diversity, both in terms of housing types and then uses. So we see this as a very vibrant, mixed-use kind of development with retail, restaurants, outdoor activity areas, different types of housing. So anywhere from an efficiency apartment to a 2 or 3 bedroom townhouse could be part of the plan, and is what we're showing in the plan. Something that starts to give a sense of community, so you'll see it's got kind of a center to it, as I mentioned earlier, and it really is something where we want it to have a strong sense of place, both in terms of architecture and the uses, but also just the activities that will be kind of part of the plan. And then making it sustainable and thinking about the environment and how kind of we've got this precious land available to us to develop. How can we do that in a responsible way? You'll see some of the natural features that are on the land. Currently, we're going to try to enhance them and kind of bring them to life and respect them and honor them. So those were some of the qualities that we also thought were important. Again, I think we had at least 2 or 3 sessions with again, a lot of you. We spent a lot of time early on talking about what we thought this should be, and it was very lively. We spent time looking at different types of architecture and spaces that we felt would be great components of any development that happens on the site. So again, this is just an excerpt from one of the work sessions we had, and again, it was very lively, and I think it was good to kind of get the input and the dialogue from everyone. Again, I'm giving you little bits and pieces, but the other aspect that is important, obviously, especially as a developer starts to look at this property, is, you know, what does the property have to offer in terms of utilities? What are the encumbrances? This site, if you're familiar with it, most of you are, starts up high on the highway and then it slopes fairly steeply as it heads to the west. And then there's a large kind of intermittent pond. There are trails on the site. They're actually nice trails, and we look to kind of enhance that, so it's really nice. The land also slopes back up towards the north as you're heading toward the Kmart development. So it's got challenges in that respect. It's not this nice flat site that we can just do whatever we want to. So the plan is try to incorporate these opportunities. I look at these natural opportunities into something I think that works. So you've got kind of this almost this little bowl that's created once you kind of get over the ridge of the area that's basically right about here. It kind of follows along here, and it starts to drop down toward the pond. This is fairly flat in here, but the developer that's been part of our team, Chad Barton from Cherry Street Capital, you know, initially when he saw it, you know, developers see slopes and start to get a little nervous, but I think he understood then the capability and the opportunity that slope provides in terms of just overlooks and just different topography that gives character to the site and the development. But there are power lines that run through the site. So just making sure that we are trying to kind of work within some of the restrictions or some of the encumbrances that are on the site. The one thing that has been more recent, I don't think we've had a public meeting since this, but there are 4 acres that are actually on US 31, which is right here. This 4 acres here, this is US 31 up here, that the township has secured. And really, it was important, that was important real estate, I think, to make sure that the 20 acres plus that's to the west has a good kind of threshold to the highway, and I think we felt the value of that was very much going to contribute to a better development. So they were able to secure it at a reasonable price. It's a pretty big piece of property, so we really looked at creating kind of sub-areas on the property related to different influences. So the portion that is closest to the highway became kind of what we're calling our primary mixed-use area. So that's the area that will have, our hope is it has retail or restaurants with housing above it. So we get some of what we call stacked flats in the mix. And it's the parking, so you kind of, I'll show you the plan in a minute. The parking is there to support the fact that we'll have both housing and commercial activities. The green belt becomes kind of our, I'm going to call it kind of our centerpiece to the development. Really, we've got kind of that nice natural feature here, which is the pond, and the sloped area here, which we're looking at terraced gardens. We're looking at some things that I'll show you in the plan in a minute, but really using the outdoor features too. So we're not, our intention is not to just fill this land up with a bunch of buildings. Our plan is to kind of have some beautiful outdoor space as well as architecture and housing and other mixed uses that become, again, a central place for gathering. A lot of the things that we heard in the first meeting were just, we'd like a place to go, whether we want to be active, passive, just kind of hang out, but it also could be programmed for a lot of different things based on what we're showing in the plan. Then what we're calling a residential district, which is predominantly housing without commercial, again, different types. We're showing primarily 2 types of housing, stacked flats or apartments, and then townhouses with garages. And the townhouses with garages could be either rental or for sale product. I'm going to pause for a minute. Are there any questions or comments so far?
Mike, no single-family resident?
No.
Standalone? Okay.
No, I mean, as I said, almost 90% of the housing stock in Filer is single-family detached. So the studies are saying that you've got plenty of that. Let's look at some other types of housing.
My question was on behalf of the planning commission, because we're still working with the ordinance to match whatever comes out of your efforts, and want to make sure that we've got it appropriately tied to this. So, okay.
Correct. Yeah. Now, again, as I said, the plan is a direction and it's a guide. If for some reason that there has some merit looking at that, but I would say that's not a housing type that's lacking in the township.
So, I just want to make sure we didn't need to provide for that, because it's
No.
not contemplated in the plan.
Right.
Okay.
You've got a notation here, connection to Pine Ridge. By what authority do you have, because several of us are here from Pine Ridge, we have to maintain those grounds ourselves. We have to, the expense of the walking areas, everything. What authority do you have to connect to a private facility like that?
Again, I'm going to characterize these as ideas that are generated from some conversations earlier.
Okay.
It isn't prescriptively saying that's going to be a trail. I think there are some residents here of Pine Ridge that said it would be nice to be able to connect to the trails.
Okay.
So that's in a response.
This is a concept only, no kind of,
Right.
okay.
There's not any implied authority, it's just, we heard that in the residents of Pine Ridge would love to be able to kind of have a nice way to kind of walk to whatever outdoor areas, even to the, you know, these are gonna be walkable sidewalk, streetscapes, and as well as the, kind of call it the downtown area or the central area, so.
Hello?
Mr. Corby, if I may, I'm Jamie Robertson, and I am a member of Pine Ridge. And I did write up a little comment regarding that walkway, because I saw it just last night. And I just want to bring this because it is important, so it needs to be done for consideration. So if I may read it very quickly. Pine Ridge Condominium is a private residential association comprised of single-family homes and duplex buildings. This planned unit development, when completed, will consist of 90 units. Presently, there are 42 units with 3 or 4 more buildings to be constructed this spring. It's important to note that the property surrounding the condominium buildings belongs exclusively to Pine Ridge and for their use only. So let me be clear. Common areas throughout Pine Ridge are private and for the use of the co-owners only, not the general public. So please take note of this statement, and because it impacts any proposal that you have for construction or any thought that had been discussed before. As of this date, and to my knowledge, Pine Ridge owners have not been informed of this proposal. And that is the nuance that I want to talk about. If our board of directors had been made aware of this walkway connection to Pine Ridge common area, co-owners would have to have a say, maybe even a vote on it. Anytime you change or alter the common area and coming from a public area, you'd have to alter the common area. So we need to discuss it as a group. So therefore, I would not consider this as a done deal. And I would hold on this idea. Our president is here tonight. I was going to go ahead and talk to the board about this a little bit further, but that's kind of where we stand. Even though a group of people think that it's a very good idea at Pine Ridge, it needs to be discussed because it would alter the common area.
Point well taken. I think what we can do then, as it was an idea that came up through the discussion, we can put it as a potential connection, but I think they'll understand that there's no implied
Yeah, okay.
kind of authority to do that.
I'm just going to ask that my notes be part of your group tonight, or whatever notes you take.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And again, I think, as I said earlier, it's really more to promote the connectivity, not to be specific about how it happens, but I think we'll make sure that the plan responds to that.
One more question.
Yes.
What percentage of those units are rental units?
I don't know exactly. I think it could be 100%, it could be some proportion less than that. I think typically the stack flats are going to be more suitable for a rental. The townhouses are the type that many times could be sold or rented. I think, again, the developer is going to try to understand it. The pro forma models were set up so that the townhouses would be probably more of a for sale product and the stacked flats would be more rental. But it's possible even the units above the retail or restaurant could be condominiumized as well. We'll have to see. Condominiums are not as popular and not as needed in the community, so we'll have to see.
They're not being designed as subject to Section 8 or any low-cost housing as far as that. Okay.
We're not dictating any of that, but I think, again, the one thing that we haven't done yet that we will do, and I'll talk about it in the timeline at the conclusion, is identify the criteria that will be used to evaluate the developer partners. And if developer partners are coming with specific housing types that they want to look at, we would obviously take that into account as part of the criteria. So, again, to reorient you, this is the highway here, this is US 31. We would be coming off of US 31. There would be a small, I'm going to use kind of more familiar terms, a smaller main street. As I mentioned in previous sessions, the study that was done by Bob Gibbs, a retail consultant, identified that there is potential for retail demand in the area, and it can support retail growth in the area, albeit maybe not big boxes like Kmart, but smaller retailers. So I think our plan kind of listened to that a little bit and didn't kind of just show a bunch of retail that maybe wasn't supported through a study or some sort of more formal analysis. The housing study also, I think it's less than a couple of years old, and it identified hundreds of housing units that would be in demand in the area. And I think that's probably grown since the time that we started this process. So we're showing under 170 units total in the entire 20 acres. So in terms of density, it's on the, call it the high end of low density. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we're planning to leave a lot of the area open for outdoor activities or pathways or recreation, and not fill the site up. But we are, the housing itself is more clustered together so that you get it doesn't, it has a nice walkable sense, as I said, the streets and the sidewalks and the architecture, that alignment and that relationship kind of promotes better walkability. And I'll show you some of the renderings in a second. Yes, sir.
A couple of questions. That first thing you said looked like it was property on the south side of Red Apple that you guys own. It's just this part of the,
Over here.
this is it? Yeah. Is that yours too to develop or not?
That's not part of this plan.
Okay, just this. So
Yes.
you're not doing anything with Kmart, getting rid of Kmart or anything like that?
No,
Just that little part?
the owner of this building here, this strip center, is not the same owner as Kmart's. That individual also, I think, owns this building. They've participated in some of the community sessions. I think they're sitting in the background looking to see what happens. But we've done some, I think in some earlier sessions, we showed some theoretical adjustments that we could make to tie in with what we're doing. But the township does not own them, they don't control them, and who knows what will happen to them. But we're hoping that this is a catalyst for the redevelopment of those properties into something that's better than what's there.
So, I'm Johnny come lately, but are you a company or you work for the filer or what do you?
I'm a consultant, I'm a land planner and architect.
So no one's bought, you guys own the property, no one's shelling out the money yet to do this, is that
The
right?
township, and I think the DDA and the township own different pieces of this.
I know, but to start building and renovating, do you need a company to come in and do that, or are you guys doing it?
No, we don't develop.
All right,
We're
so-
not, we're just, I should say we're just. Put pretty pictures together. I think that, and I'll go to the, as I said to start the meeting, the plan is to get a development partner. What that development scenario looks like is unknown yet. It could be there are companies, there's one in particular that would actually do a public-private partnership with the township where the township could stay in as part owner of the development in some ways. Each developer has kind of their own method of operating, so we'll have to see, number one, who we can get interested in, and two, what kind of program they would want to bring. So that's why, even though you're going to see a lot of visual imagery that's very suggestive, it could change a little bit. But I think the basic guidelines are embodied in this plan, and I think instead of just saying, here's property, what do you want to do? We need housing, do something with it. We're guiding them a little bit more. Any other questions? So, the tallest building that at least we're showing right now is 3 stories, but most of them are 2 or 3 stories. So these, again, these are, for instance, B6 we're showing as a 2-story building. These others are 3-story buildings. But again, mixed use, retail, restaurant, main level, with housing above that. It could be even office above that, but as we kind of, this is, if you recall, this is that hillside that I mentioned, so you're starting to see references, at least in this drawing, of terracing, and I'll show you the rendering of that in a second, but really wanted to create open spaces. We want this to be a community destination that can house activities in the summer, activities in the winter. It's got its own kind of 24-hour residence, so it's a neighborhood in and of itself, but it's also meant to be a community asset. The idea of the hamlet is one that kind of connotes, you know, not just housing, but a mix of uses that come together to create a community. We're showing things like a central green. Again, these are things that are yet to be determined. We're showing an amphitheater that came up in some of the early discussions. There has been some planning, I think, in the past to show or to look at maybe some pickleball courts. So we, again, activity areas, not just places to go eat and shop or live, but areas where you can kind of recreate as well were part of the commentary that we heard. So we also understood that they wanted to kind of keep the pickleball courts away from the housing just because of the noise. But there's also another part of the plan is to take the slope, and instead of just having that be land that you can't build on very easily, we looked at doing kind of terraced gardens along there, so it's actually kind of a more thoughtful and I think more beautiful way to kind of treat that particular landscape. And it's got south-facing slopes. And then having a staging area for both the trail head, but also the garden, so you've got kind of a garden shed and activity lawn so that you can have maybe a more formal gardening area as well as part of that outdoor activity area. These buildings here are shown predominantly as what we call stacked flats, which are basically 3-story apartment buildings. Parking is in the center so that we're maintaining kind of the walkability around the perimeter. We've got slope here as well, so these 2 particular buildings are actually 3 stories along the roadway, and then there are 2 stories in the back because the grades slope upward. And then at this time we're showing some townhouses here. And again, that came out of some of the discussion we had. You've got, as was mentioned earlier, we've got single family in lower scaled housing in Pine Ridge. So we wanted to keep kind of our lowest density, lower scale housing kind of closer to the Pine Ridge housing development. We're showing access from Red Apple, so this is basically our new street network. We've got a small roundabout here that kind of opens up to the public open space, but you can also drive up the drive and connect to 31 if you wanted to. We're also indicating possible connectivity to the north, again, provided there's some cooperative development scenarios that might happen with the Kmart property, the commercial properties to the north. But again, these are things that we're planning for, and we've got some strategies on how that can work successfully, but again, the township is not on it. So I'll try to orient you. So these are a few views. I think this first view is as you're coming in from Red Apple. Again, the architecture could be different than this, but I think what we did here is we wanted something that was distinctive, it was simple, but had nice materials. So we're looking at using kind of stained wood and brick. Familiar with materials, but ones that are kind of maybe used freshly. I mean, there's a lot of outdoor and kind of rural qualities to the township, so something that maybe respected that and kind of honored that a little bit in the architecture. So again, these aren't meant to be, this is what it's going to be, but I think the things that are important in this image are sidewalks, street trees, a real kind of sense of walkability that you don't always get in developments. I think those are the important aspects that we want. So those layers are important, relationships between cars and people in the housing. So even front porches are important. Cars along the streets, those tend to, again, help suggest slower traffic. And then again, just a few glimpses of what could be our small kind of central area that has retail and restaurants and then housing or office above. Natural materials, a fresh look, but still trying to use some architectural language that seems somewhat familiar. So this is kind of in the amphitheater looking back up. This is that slope that I mentioned earlier. We're kind of terracing up. So things like this, if a developer looks at this and they see a lot of these public work or public spaces, the township has mechanisms that they can use to help developers fund this and get paid for it through the tax increment that they'll be creating. So again, these are more detailed discussions that we'll get into as we start to kind of talk to development partners. Any questions, reactions, thoughts?
I just had kind of a general question, like, will Filer or whoever continues to own the land and then somebody else owns the buildings, or, I mean, how does that work?
Don't know the answer. It's, we do a lot of work with projects like this. We respond a lot with teams, and it's very possible our office might team up with the developer as well and try to respond to a team as the design partner. But it depends. It depends on the relationship between the developer and the township. The township, some communities, like we're doing one in Traverse City right now with the city does not want to sell the land. So there are challenges with that kind of situation where a developer who needs to garner financing to get it, banks don't like to lend you money to build something that they don't own the land. So, but there are ways to get around that with longer term leases. There are partnerships that could happen where, as I said earlier, the township could be a part of the investment. So they still kind of own the land, but the developer also has ownership of land. Or the township could sell all or parts of the land. So I don't know the answer, but I'm not saying it because I don't know the answer, except that it could be any one of the many different scenarios.
But the developer would own the building.
Typically, the developer's going to build and finance and own and operate the buildings, yes.
And
Typically.
maintain, and do maintenance inside, outside for the apartments.
Yeah, one of the criteria that we would typically want to look at as we look at developers are those that have track records of building quality buildings and maintaining quality buildings. And so this is a large development. It's not a tiny development. So it's going to, I think it's not going, you're not going to have smaller developers probably have an interest in this because of the size of it, which is a good thing. I think so the larger developers tend to have a more organized system with how they're going to get the building financed, how they're going to market the buildings, how they'll maintain the buildings, and how they, kind of enforce any of the kind of restrictions or property management kinds of things that they have. And that'll be important to the township, I think, as they're looking at the different developers that respond.
As a local realtor, I have been dreaming of someone doing townhouses with garages for the clients that are coming to our community. My vision had been for a parcel in Nasty Township
city-owned Renaissance. So I applaud Tyler that they're ahead of the curve, and I don't think there'll be any problem filling them up. Just the issue will be finding the right developer for our community.
I agree. Yeah, all the ingredients are in place. Filer actually has, again, some statistics that I mentioned in some earlier meetings. Filer has the highest per capita income of any area in the county. That's a good thing. Again, when this statistic was put together, Filer has 1,400 people that commute in to work for the Filer. So they don't live here, but they work here. And some of those, who knows, many of those may want to live here, but the choices that they have maybe aren't as attractive, so who knows? But I think, and then some others that have spoken in some of the previous sessions as well, talked about their experiences when they came here from other areas, and they just wanted an apartment for a couple of years. They had no options really, or the options were to rent a house, and they just didn't want to get into the hassles or the work to do that. They wanted a simpler kind of rental situation. So I think we're really focusing what we're doing on the need that's been kind of discovered through the data that the township has really, and the county has been pulling together. I think the developer's going to like that. They're going to like the fact that homework's been done, that the vision is set. You've invested in a lot of things that a lot of times aren't invested in by the municipalities or the governmental agencies. The developers have to then spend dollars to do, and this way you've kind of made it a little bit easier then to see where this thing might head and how it might be more viable. And again, as Mr. Barton has done, is, the first iteration of this had 280 units or something. He just said that's not realistic. That's too many units. Even though there's a housing need here, we need to scale it back, and we need to do something that is not quite as grandiose. And so I think it's kind of been scaled back to respond to some of that reality.
How about traffic lights? And Red Apple and US31 is sort of dangerous. And then if people are going to be turning left into there or turning off Red Apple, will the state allow you to make things a little safer there?
Well, typically,
A traffic light or a
yeah,
roundabout or something?
right. I don't know. I think generally what happens with developments like these, the MDOT is going to want to understand the traffic impact, because the superficial development that's along the highway there is one thing, but when you're you've got a development that's got this kind of depth. Good thing is we do have access off of Red Apple. I don't know the answer to that question, but that's something that'll come out just in terms of traffic studies and figuring out how to make sure that this is safe to maneuver in and out.
Because traffic, you can imagine how more traffic there coming off Red Apple and the speed of people coming down 31. I hope they'll put a traffic light there.
But,
Something to make it safer.
well, I'm sorry, I'm Tamara Buzwinka, I'm the DDA director. Maybe Terry wants to speak on this, but US 31 in this area is going to be, Terry, do you want to talk about this?
No, I was just going to make that comment for those that aren't aware. MDOT does have a proposed project. They haven't done the engineering for it yet. Another board member and I sat in on like a seminar with MDOT about 3 weeks ago. It's going to be a complete reconstruct from from M55 on US 31 intersection all the way to Stronach Road. Much of which will be occurring during 26 and 27. And we did speak to some of the township's concerns at that time, And we'll be following up with some emails and had a conversation last week with our engineer of record from Wade Trim to weigh in on those conversations that we'll be having in regard to what our hopes and plans are, projected plans for the future of the 31 corridor, and then along with safety issues, walkability issues, all of that. So we will be weighing in and you know, hopefully, yeah, we know that I think our previous fire chief who's here could speak to the efforts that he made in trying to get a stoplight at that intersection several times over the years, and you know, without success. Some of their criteria, I don't even want to tell you what it was for having a stoplight, but it just didn't make sense. But I think, you know, a project like this, along with other plans that we have for the corridor, coming together at the time of the reconstruction of that highway, hopefully we can get some of those changes.
Yeah, we again, all the communications that we have been very preliminary in nature, but we have reached out to MDOT just to confirm that we can put on the highway as we're showing. It meets their criteria. We haven't gone through any formal applications with them. It also meets their criteria for distance from the Murky Road light. If it warrants a light, we've got the distance there. So even this entry drive here potentially, if the traffic counts were sufficient, either short or long term, it's possible there could be a light there. But again, these are things that are very preliminary in nature in terms of their resolution. So just want to go through a timeline. Over the next few months, the township, DDA, Planning Commission has a lot of work to do still. I think the Planning Commission started to really address, the township started to address zoning specifically for this property. I think that was put on pause till we kind of concluded or got a clearer vision. I think one of the early steps is going to be kind of revisiting that document. It hasn't been formally published or adopted yet, so we'll have to see how well that aligns with what we're doing, or what kind of adjustments might need to be made in that, or if it's still valid. So I think getting the zoning, getting the entitlement side ready is important also for any development that might happen on the site. And then we'll be starting to develop the RFP. So as I mentioned earlier, getting the criteria, we've been working with Tamara to just get the outline of the RFP set up, start to get the structure, start to talk about content. But the RFP is going to really talk about the goals and objectives of the township, the things that are important to the township, the criteria that they're going to look for any partner that they have, and really kind of start to set up and make sure they understand how that relationship should be and what the vision needs to kind of resemble. We'll be publishing that RFP. And again, these are fungible, hopefully sometime in March. It's yet to be determined, but that's kind of the goal right now.
Hey, Mike, would you just talk about what an RFP is and what it does?
Right, an RFP it stands for Request for Proposal. Basically, it'll be open to anybody really, but what we'll be doing is probably specifically sending it to developers that we know can do this kind of project, but anybody that chooses to want to respond has the ability to respond. It'll be a developer RFP, so that means it'll go to a company that can coordinate everything that somebody mentioned. They can figure out how to get financing for the property, how to market the property, They'll be the ones securing the design team and the builder, how it gets built. They'll typically developers are going to have some sort of property management group that they either work with or that they have as part of their services. So the types of developers that we're looking at for this will be coordinating the project. Obviously, they'll be working with the township to understand how that relationship's going to work. Just a lot of our business, 80% of our business is housing in Michigan. It's tough to make housing projects work. Construction prices that are an all-time high right now. Incomes are rising, but they're still not keeping pace with the cost of construction. So for the realtor in the room, you kind of understand that equation. It's just, so things that the governmental agencies can do, the state's pouring money into communities, there are local organizations that are trying to help with housing initiatives. There are financing mechanisms that they'll look at. Don't know all the bag of tricks that they have, but the bottom line is it takes kind of a real team effort, I guess, from all aspects to make these projects work. So the good news from your perspective is you got a strong housing need. You're in a part of the community that has a higher income level. You've got industry and jobs. You've got a lot of studies that kind of confirm that the need is strong, so that you've kind of really let them understand that this thing can work. Let's just figure out how to make it work. And now what this has done is it's kind of like, this is the kind of community, or this is the kind of development that we want to see, so that you don't have to go through a process to try to educate them in another way. But we haven't discussed how we're going to kind of stage that. We might just ask for developers to send information about their firm and whether we determine that they have the ability to do this and they have the reputation. So we might do a two-stage process where it's actually an RFQ before an RFP. So they would submit their qualifications. We'll make sure that we only spend time reviewing in more detail the companies that are actually capable of doing this. And that may be what we recommend. And then the RFP itself will be getting into more detail, how they want to structure the project. They'll probably have some opinions on how many units there are, what types of units there are. They might say there's too much retail, we want to cut back some. They may suggest other uses on the site, but that's when it gets into a little bit more of a granular response from them. Yes?
Real quick question, how involved was your local real estate or realtors involved in this whole planning process? I mean, if they, could feed you information on what people, like she had said, townhouses as opposed to, condos as opposed to flats. Have they been involved in this process? Or are we guessing what kind of housing is needed here?
I don't think we're guessing in the sense that I think rental housing, I think there has been some input from realtors in some of the sessions, but if you're talking about, are there 30% of them 2 bedrooms and 20%, we haven't gotten that detailed. I think developers are going to look at the market. They're going to look at what the market needs. They're going to look at what works best in the market in terms of return on investment, which tends to be what the market needs. So they'll get into that. And they typically have, some of them have brokers and they have realtors in their groups. Some of them will work with the local networks. So, but I think what we saw from the housing studies was predominantly rental, serving a pretty broad demographic. So not just low income, but market rate, even higher end market rate was determined to be a need. So I think that diversity is probably what's going to be part of the plan. So the RFPs will come in, they'll be evaluated. The township will probably create some sort of, presumably some sort of committee that at least does initial reviews of them, and again has criteria that kind of figures out who are the most viable candidates. Sometimes one emerges as a clear, higher candidate. For instance, the project that we are doing in Traverse City, they interviewed, I think, 5 firms. They selected us the day that we interviewed. Others maybe go through a couple stages of interviews. Just depends. Depends on who we get, how strong their response is, and how well it aligns with the township's priorities. So we don't know exactly how that process is going to go, but I think the process is to ultimately get a partner. Then I think that committee will get that endorsed by the board, and obviously that endorsement session will be a public hearing, and the community will be able to kind of comment on that. And then any modifications to the plan will be starting to emerge, whether they want to tweak some things or do some things that are different, or they typically are going to need time to figure out how to get it financed. They're going to need time to do things. So it's not something that you get a developer on board and 12 months later there's housing coming out of the ground. It's possible, but usually with public-private partnerships like this, it takes a while to work out the logistics of the relationship and then ultimately to get to design and construction. So this is just a timeline to get us to hopefully having that partner with the township at their side, working out some of that stuff. But we're a couple of years away from having housing probably on the site or any meaningful architecture there. So again, I mean, as I said, I see a lot of familiar faces. It's been great, the energy that we've had. We've had good participation even in the fact that I think the first session was a virtual session, which wasn't so much fun, but we trudged through it, and people have been very accommodating, and I appreciate your patience. I want to thank the township as well. They've been very supportive. They haven't tried to dictate, they haven't tried to overly direct, they've kind of let the voices emerge, and the plans, I think, moved along nicely with public input. So we're excited to see it happen. I can't wait to see it happen. I think, Tamara's been very supportive and has helped us kind of facilitate a lot of these discussions. So this is probably our last session before we get into kind of the formal selection process. We'll have to see what the next milestone might be that we want to invite everyone together to see what the progress is. But I want to say thank you. Job's not done, but we've covered a lot of ground and done a lot of good things for the last year. So thank you. I'll stick around if there's any questions or